John, the floor is yours. If we can have the panelists come and join us. Thank you.
Nicos Bornozis likes tradition, which mandates to start with eye-catching introductions, and we will not disappoint him. Ladies and gentlemen, in the next 40 minutes, you will be entertained with tales of the good, the bad, and the scrubby, and passion for creation. The 3 Ps presented at Capital Link by Mr. Tsavliris, patience, perseverance, and passion, for 2020, they will become the 2020 Ps, that is, prepare, plan, practice, augmented by predict. Although 2020 will bring tectonic costs to shipping, it will benefit agriculture, environment, and save human lives, maybe more than 500,000 of them and more. It is a regulation worth its money. Our panel will discuss the implementation and the preparation for implementing the regulation. Our distinguished panel consists of Mr. Mikhail Shapiro, Head of Marine Fuels of Glencore Energy UK, a commodity trader, Mr. Nicos Rescos, Chief Operations Officer of Starbulk, Mr. Vangelis Rousos, Technical Business Development Manager of Tufton Oceanic, a fund management company with quite a few ships among their assets, and last but not least, Mr. Bourboulis, General Manager of Euronav Hellas. I will try to ask different questions each panelist, so we'll have a variety of replies. Let me start with Mr. Rousos. Do you think that the disruption due to 2020 will create a chaotic environment on 1st of January of 2020 and later? Do you expect increase in consumer goods prices as a result of the fuel bill hikes?
Thank you for the question, John. And thanks for Nicolas for having us. Yeah, it's an interesting question, but I will start by saying that chaotic is a bit of a strong word to use here. And the reason I'm saying that is because our industry has been in this position, not in the exact same position, but in a similar position before, when we were switching over from 0.5 to 0.1 for the ECAs. So it's not something that's completely new. So the straight answer would be no. I don't think it's going to be a chaotic environment. But on the supply side, there will be disruptions. That's something that everybody identifies and everybody has in their mind. You'll see slow steaming, you will see bunkering delays, you will see even engineering breakdowns, all the things that the previous panel has discussed are a real concern on the supply side. Now on the demand side, things are a bit more complicated because there are macro headwinds that could disrupt the demand side. But on core shipping, the fact that bunker prices will be rising overnight by, 30%? Again, it's not something that has not happened before. I mean, we go back as soon as early as 2010. I remember summer of 2010, Brent was about $70, and 6 months after, it went up to 120. consumer goods did not spike at the time, and we don't expect it to do so now. Now, there's also other factors to consider, right? At the time, interest rates were zero, so inflation was zero, and there was no way for consumer prices to move up. Right now, consumer prices are not zero, but some would say some would be thankful anyway that the macro policy is dovish as it was back then. So I don't see why this change would create a chaotic environment on the demand side. And if there is anything that should happen on the supply side, it's probably positive for the owning community.
Thank you. So that means we should not make a run in the supermarkets or in the computer stores or in the electric appliance stores to buy new products.
Not unless you know something more.
Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Bourboulis, what is your company doing to prepare with respect to crew training, fuel procurement and management, and tank cleaning? And when is the start date at Euronav for debunkering the non-compliant fuel?
I will start from the last question. We will do our best to end up by the end of this year without having non-compliant fuel on board our ships, because none of our ships is planned to have a scrubber. So our strategy is to be sure to avoid carrying next year non-compliant fuel on board the ships. In relation to the preparation, this is a big process which has started a long time ago. A thorough review of all the fleet, the possibilities to segregate the bunker tanks, to identify possible methods for cleaning, and gradually performing, mainly we do with the use of the crew resources to prepare the tanks. And of course, the training, we cooperate with a reputable consultant, and we proceed continuously towards that target.
And procurement of fuel?
Procurement of fuel, you probably are aware, because recently it was publicized, that for the beginning, in order to avoid any possible abrupt disruptions, we have reserved a quantity of being stored on board one of the ULCCs that we have, which is 440,000 tons dead weight. So we will cover kind of basic needs through that, and the rest through the spot market.
And you have another ULCC, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, actually there are 4 ULCCs, sister ships. The 2 of them are converted to FSOs, but the other one is more, let's say, flexible for a potential follow-up if necessary.
Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Rescos, your company has elected to go with the second option allowed by IMO, that is, continue use heavy fuel oil combined with exhaust gas cleaning systems known as scrubbers. Do you think that the scrubber solution is a long-term solution or a temporary one with an expiration date? If it is, would it be more financially prudent to act now as you do, as opposed to the future?
Thank you, John, and thank you for the very nice cartoon and with the mustache. I think both low sulfur fuel solutions and compliant fuel solutions and exhaust gas cleaning system are medium-term solutions. They're neither short-term or long-term. So it's a decision of a company to select a model. We have researched this for almost 3 years before we went out to order for the majority of our fleet, so we are one of the early adopters. We believe that as long as the regulation remains, after extensive research and multiple data points being recorded over the last year on the impact of scrubbers to the environment, which I think has been well documented, but we can explore that during the panel further, as well as the ability to reduce emissions in general versus compliant fuel emissions, I think it makes a very viable solution for the medium term. Now, if something does change in the future, which of course is always a possibility, it may not happen next year, but the year after, as a company, we will invest in technologies to improve on the systems we have already installed. It's important to note that the experience so far with 30 running systems is impressive. We're recording data for ourselves, which we'll be submitting later on to flag states and authorities as we move along through the process. And eventually, I think everything will be replaced by the next technology, whether it's LNG in an affordable format and in a method that can fit the Trump nature of tankers and bulkers. It remains to be seen. We're hopeful towards that direction and will adapt as the situation requires.
Thank you. Somewhat, I'm tempted to ask Mr. Shapiro, although I know that he is a fuel expert. He was here last year, as you recall. But I would like to ask a general question, which is a policy question. We know that shipping, maybe unintentionally, punishes the early movers. We have seen that in the case of ballast water treatment. Do you think that something like that will happen in the case of scrubbers, for example? What is your opinion about this?
So I think the most important kind of feedback that I can give is having been here last year and seeing the reaction and the emotion in the crowd. There was definitely a lot of anger and resentment towards this regulation. This doesn't seem to be the mood now. In the meetings that we've had this week and the preparation of the last year, everybody certainly seems to have a plan. I know that we've taken an extraordinary amount of planning before we made any decisions, and this included a very diverse amount of analysis. We obviously participate through the whole supply chain, all the way from refining to running ships of our own in the crude markets, distillate markets, fuel markets. We're one of the largest retail marine fuel suppliers. I've personally met with the IMO. I've done a lot of work with the ISO committee in development and the new PAS. And I think a lot of the things that we talk about now as these things that people should be doing are probably things people should have been doing all along, such as segregation, such as understanding who your suppliers are, understanding the characteristics of the fuels that you're buying, checking thoroughly your counterparties. We spend an inordinate amount of time checking our counterparties. And I'm hopeful that the rest of the market is as prepared and as receptive as our counterparties have been. And, people talk about scrubbers. Scrubbers have been around for a very long time. I mean,
exactly.
This is not a new technology. The IMO has said that they're open to these technologies, so it's an option. And if it's an option people want to use, then they will use it. Last year, everybody's saying, oh my God, these 0.5 fuels, there won't be any. There's a lot of 0.5 fuel out there right now. Some of it is coming from the refiners. Some of it is on floating storage. It's in a lot of different places. Understanding how to handle that fuel, taking the right technical advice, how to prepare from the receiving side and from the supply side. We've taken inordinate steps to do that because I think a lot of the issues will come for the people that are less prepared. And they're much more likely to be the ones that face the penalties and face the pain. If you do everything right, you significantly minimize your chances. And that is why we spend an inordinate amount of time within our own fleets, within our own preparation, and also with our counterparties to ensure that we all understand what each other's responsibilities are. And also sit in these committees and groups such as this and closed-door groups where once you get everybody in the same room, there's a lot more transparency and it becomes very clear what everybody's responsibilities are. And if you do those things, you have much less problems.
Thank you. we faced this low sulfur fuel 2010 with a 0.1% in the European ports and 0.1 in the ECAs since 2015. I would like to ask on that same note, Mr. Rousos, there is a lot of controversy about the utilization of open loop scrubbers. Yet, thousands of tankers are equipped with scrubbers, the inner gas scrubbers, discharging their effluent freely during loading and unloading operations. Why do you think there is that controversy now?
Well, I think, John, we have to look at each solution in the context in which it was adopted. IGS and scrubbers are essentially the same thing. But IGS, when it was adopted as a safety item. It wasn't adopted as an environmental item. So the focus at that time when we were adopting IGS was on safety. And with time, the IGS became the prevalent and the dominant choice in inerting the tanks and became the status quo. So now nobody is questioning that. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think it's optionality. Right now, we have an option to choose between scrubbers and compliant fuel. IGS did not have an alternative. So the fact that we have optionality now maybe exacerbates the debate on whether open loop systems are environmentally acceptable or not. And finally, okay, more on the realm of the transcendental, I think the spirit of the time is different. Right now, the focus is on environmental issues. Back then, it was not. And whatever that environmental concern was, it mainly was about maybe plastics or sludge from the ships, which we have managed to eliminate, by the way, in the industry. But it's a different spirit. So I'd say three things: optionality, context, and the spirit of the times.
Just as thank you, the fact remains that the inner gas scrubbers have been on board, and they discharge about 5,000 cubic meters per day when they do their loading and unloading operations. Let me ask Mr. Bourboulis. A lot of discussion has been around about non-compliance. Do you expect a high number of failure to comply, which will disrupt the low-level playing field?
I presume you mean intentionally non-compliance.
Intentional non-compliance, yes.
I feel that for anybody in this panel, at least, there is not an option. But generally, I hope that this will not be a significant part of the choices that some operators may take. Temporarily, non-compliance, under certain circumstances, it is provided according to the current regulations, and it's going to cover the possibilities that there is no availability in certain areas of compliant fuel. So all in all, I would say that it's a lot to be considered based on how the enforcement regime will develop on that matter. On the other hand, we know that the ships that they don't have a scrubber installed, they are not allowed to carry non-compliant fuel. So this is also, for me, a very strong barrier for intentional non-compliance.
To preserve burning HFO in the middle of the ocean. Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Rescos, what is a lot of discussion has been about the fuel. What is your fuel procurement strategy? Because there is a problem of availability, of quality. Is it done on a geographical and financial basis?
Thank you, John. I would just like to go back for a quick second on the comparison with the inert gas systems. I agree more with Mikhail. There has been a huge amount of research done over the past few years. I'm not going to bore the audience with every single study, but I'm talking about the CDELF study, the DNV Carnival study, the Japanese Ministry of Transport study, that have all looked into the details of the effect of PAHs, the wash water, PM, and of course sulfur. And there's a huge data set available that has been submitted to the IMO, especially between February and March this year when the debate really heated up. And so far, there is no concrete evidence, recorded evidence, that open loop wash water is harmful to the environment. There have been cases to the contrary, and if you want to explore that further, I'm happy to discuss that. But back to your question on bunkers. This has been moving sands for all of us. It is definitely geographical, the decision we're going to take, and physical, not derivatives, because that will still require significant credit lines at a time where we still see uncertainty for the coming months. We have spent several months debating and discussing with all our suppliers, traders and refineries, on what could they supply next year. We have no huge concern of HFO availability. We see about 1 million barrels per day excess supply of HFO that will gradually fall to about 500,000 by the end of the year with the equilibrium of the compliant fuel supply, but there's still a lot of fuel out there. We did a research where we saw Platts was not anymore representative of reality about 6 months ago. And that's because there's huge uncertainty on barging efficiency, refineries cleaning up their lines, and suppliers want to make a decent buck next year. This is being streamlined over the past few months. We see more opportunity for contracts, more suppliers, more solid proposals. But I think decision-making will take place for us this quarter.
Thank you. So let me ask Michael a question in your area of the goods. Being a fuel expert, what would be your recommendation for the standards to be applied on the fuel to buy, and what tests can be done to ensure that the quality is what it should be?
I think the best way to address this probably, obviously within our own company, we do a significant amount of extra testing and our own internal testing on fuels. All of that is driven on the, I guess for our company, 30 plus years of experience in bunkers that we have. And myself personally, the last 2 decades in blending fuels and looking at different fuel properties and also seeing the new fuels on the market. And also working within ISO, I think it gives us a very unique look. We've looked at many different tests and many different ways to see how we can make fuels better and test them better. It is very clear that from an overall standpoint, ISO provides a lot of information about the fuel. Additional steps you can take beyond that, obviously, is to understand who your suppliers are, understand the transparency in which they operate and where their fuel comes from. I think you've seen a lot of this reflected in the reemergence of the traditional refiners coming in and saying we're going to be supplying, almost every refiner saying we're going to have 0.5 fuel available. Some of them have chosen to enter the retail space themselves, which has not been done, and as was previously rightly pointed out, there is a credit constraint there that is going to be faced if prices do go up. So I think from that standpoint, you really need to understand the transparency, know that you're dealing with people that understand the formulation of their fuel and where their fuel is coming from. You want to have some consistency that is not going to always be possible. And I think there's a lot of very solid advice that's coming from many advisory agencies that have seen this in the past, they're seeing the testing issues, that are saying, hey, segregate your fuels, understand what you're putting on board, train your crews, don't mix the fuels in the day tank. All of these things that you can try to avoid and take those preparations, these are things that can go wrong. Compatibility was never a guarantee before between fuels. So to assume that this is an issue now, I think has been addressed over the last, say, 6 months. People have come to terms with it, and now they're taking a lot of preparatory steps. So obviously, the most important part is understand who it is that you're dealing with and who your counterparties are, and rely on that experience. And not everybody that says they're going to half 0.5 fuel necessarily does that.
So if, for example, I know beforehand, before delivery, if I know, for example, the density and the viscosity of the fuel to be delivered, or the blend, if you prefer, can I make any conclusion about the compatibility with what I have in the tanks now? And would you think that a spot test on board might be conclusive? Would you do that? Would you risk something like that?
The spot test, there's a reason why the spot test has never really been part of ISO. I suggest that you do go, if you don't have a copy of the PES, go purchase it and read it. There is a reference to it. The spot test has an inherent flaw when you're dealing with fuels that don't have asphaltenes in them. You will, and it is, as somebody mentioned before, it is a subjective test. So while it is helpful, there are other tests within the ISO specs, such as sediment, aged, that will give you a much better view on the fuel itself. But truly, the way to know whether two fuels are compatible is to put them together. So while that's why the best policy has always been not to mix the fuels, and that's the expectation that we have. And a lot of our customers that buy the fuel, and frankly, when we do on our ships, everybody tries to make that best effort. And that's very similar feedback from almost every single person that we have met in Greece. And everybody's certainly taken very heavy preparations on this, as well as compliance, as well as cleaning and not having high sulfur. People understand this is coming. They've really come to terms with it, and they're doing it. So I think this is the best way to prepare. Follow these guidelines. They're all there for a reason. Don't take chances and train your crews.
So I deduce two golden rules from your reply. Number one is utilize an ISO-accredited laboratory to do the testing and the sampling of your samples. And the second golden rule is segregate, segregate, segregate.
But this is a logistical issue, right? We're segregating now between high sulfur and low sulfur in a lot of places. In refineries, on ships, everybody's segregating to a certain extent.
We should not mix fuels coming from different sources. If we can. We have about 10 minutes remaining. Instead of having a monologue between me and the panel, I believe it should be a good idea to give the floor to the audience to ask some questions. So we have a golden opportunity to ask the operators on this hot potato issue about the D-Day which approach. Mr. Pandazopoulos. Dr. Pandazopoulos, sorry.
Okay, we have, in the long term, save the environment and reduce the greenhouse effect. So we regulate the fuels that the shipping industry is burning, the aerospace industry. Can we regulate the fuel industry? Can we say we put strict regulation on the entire fuel industry in terms of producing clean fuels, and then the entire industry, the land industry, in terms of producing? So this is a more general kind of question, but since you have...
You seem to be looking at me, so I think you want me to answer. Look, I think in terms of regulation and licensing, we operate an extremely tight operation in terms of the rules. And we were one of the first proponents for mass flow meters in Singapore. We spent a significant amount of money of them. They've worked very well for us in Singapore. We are one of the largest, not only blenders, but suppliers there. They've allowed us, I think, to build a sustainable business. So we are very much proponents of these type of measures. We've tried them in other places where you didn't have this regulation. It became more difficult. So I think anybody that operates a responsible, large-scale business would like to have everybody playing by the same rules. And as I'm sure every single person in this room that has spent money on scrubbers, that has spent money on tank cleaning, that is spending money on new fuels and purchasing them, they want the same. So we all just want to be able to play by even rules
Next question? Yeah, or does anybody else from the panel want to reply? Okay. Next question?
Should I say about the previous, if there's no other question? I would like to agree that we would like very much to have a more clear regulatory field for the bunkering of the ships. Of course, this is not possible for IMO to implement because they are local regulations. Shipping associations are doing a lot in order to bring the whole operation up to a certain standard to avoid circumstances where you are caught by surprise concerning what you expect to receive and what you receive.
That's right. Let me ask another question. All the members of the panel, it's a ship management question anyway. Do you think that there is going to be some separation, like ships with scrubbers will be the favorite babies of time charterers, or the spot market? Is there going to be a difference in treating the vessels between spot market, spot chartering, and time chartering? What will be the final outcome, and how long is it going to last? Mr. Rescos.
I think charterers started off a year and a half ago skeptical on employing scrubbers, scrubber-fitted vessels. As time goes by, and especially during the last 3 months, we have seen almost all our clients coming to us to negotiate a deal basis time charter and a profit share. On the voyage side of the question, it's a matter of what kind of vessel you're talking about. So big ships and long-haul voyages, it makes sense to go for voyage where you take the differential, whatever that will be, for yourself. On the smaller vessels, probably a strategy of fixing vessels away as long as you have a reasonable profit share agreement with the charter, it makes sense. But all that depends also on who is investing on the scrubber. Is that joint investment? Is it the charter investing in the scrubber? Is it the owner investing and financing it? So that sets also the tone of the discussion of what you will give up as an owner. Others have gone for a flat rate just to repay the cost of the scrubber. And that also goes into how complex or not your charter party will be. So the friendlier you are on a flat rate on a contract, the easier terms you're going to have to deal with during negotiations.
Thank you. And I would like to ask a last question, because we are getting towards the end of the time. Do you predict, this is also financially related, do you predict a change in the insurance premium that we will have to pay because of 2020? Who would like to answer?
I can start and then...
Please.
I mean, we're already seeing premium going up with every time we ask insurers to give us a quote for a scrubber-fitted ship. And that's not something that came out of nowhere, it's just a function of the increased vessel value. So that's there. There's an increased premium because you have installed a scrubber. Now, there may also be an element of the extra risk involved in it, but we did not yet quantify that, and I'm not sure how that will evolve in next year or the year after.
So would the insurance coverage include fines or loss of hire due to non-availability of fuel, that type of thing, or you think not?
We've not seen it yet. We don't know what's going to happen next year, but it's not yet priced into the premium.
I would like to mention here that the recently unveiled Intertanko and BIMCO release with the clauses that should be included in the insurance contracts is a very valuable resource on what to include in an insurance agreement. With that, if there is no question from the audience, I would like to close. I would like to congratulate the panelists for an excellent job, and this concludes our presentation.